Once again, I'm Joe Schmitt, and I am a retired Marine Corps officer. And when I was a Marine, I served as the Marine Corps Air Station's logistics officer at Camp Pendleton, California in San Diego. And what an air station really is, imagine a large airfield with combat aircraft out there along a 4,000-foot runway with tons of buildings. So that's what I'm kind of talking about. But my story today is really about how my commander, through the use of servant leadership, not only saved my son's life and changed our family's life, but he started a movement called the Wounded Warrior Project. Many of you may know that. It's also called the Wounded Warrior Regiment within the Marine Corps, and it helps thousands of people today. But it started with one person making a change. So today when I talk about servant leadership, I'm really talking about putting people out front, leading, engaging, and inspiring people to do great things, things they wouldn't otherwise do unless you challenge them to do so. And I'm also talking about how we align people's passions with our organizational goals. And when we do that, we really see a significant impact. By comparison, I would tell you that traditional leadership is where a person who's in a form of leadership stands out front, has the most authority and the most power, and has behind them people that they're leading kind of in a follow-me mentality. Still very impactful, but I would tell you not nearly as impactful as servant leadership, at least in my life. That being said, I'm going to show you a picture here of my son. Drew in this picture is prior to his surgery. You can kind of look at him a little bit. He's a fantastic young kid. For the first 2 years of his life, he was very healthy. At the age of 2, we go to a normal pediatrician appointment. Who's taking their kids to a pediatrician appointment? Who's taking their kids to a pediatrician appointment telling that your son's got a life-threatening disease? That's what took place. The doctor says to us during a normal appointment that your son has got a condition called sagittal synostosis. A long word, fancy word for basically everybody remembers the soft spot on the baby's head that we should be careful of. Well, that soft spot in my son had healed and fused completely tight, and so tight that his eyes, his pupils were always very big. And I always thought they kind of looked like that kitty with a little look on his face. His eyes were always so bright, and the doctor's like, not so much. That's intracranial pressure. His brain has no room to grow. His cranial vault is too small, and it's got significant impacts. The significant impacts are he could go blind tomorrow. We don't know what level where he's at because the brain is still being discovered today. He could lose motor skills. There's a multitude of things that could take place. So this is extremely urgent that you seek medical attention. And I'm not an expert in that, he said, but we do have experts locally. So we see a local expert, and they verify the diagnosis. And he also says that, Joe, this is significant. You need to reach out and let your people know that this is taking place and really take care of your family because this is your focus right now. Well, I'm a Marine, right? I'm also married. I have a wonderful wife and an older son. So I think immediately, how do I focus on my son at this point in time with this news? So I reach back out at the end of that day after getting the news on a Monday, and I reach out to my command deck or my commanding officer, and I reach out to the secretary, and she says that the commanding officer is in tomorrow morning from 7 to 8, but he's flying out to El Central, California with all those combat helicopters I talked about to go out and do combat preparation missions in El Central, California, and then on to Yuma, Arizona, and he won't be in. So be here tomorrow morning first thing and meet the commander and kind of tell him what's taking place. So the next morning, I kind of prepare myself and how I'm going to meet the commanding officer and share this with him, and I do. I basically tell him my son's condition, and he looks at me across the table like a father and says, I will do anything in my possible to make sure that your son is okay, and not only for him, but for you as well. But he said, if any condition changes in his health, you need to let me know immediately. And I say, okay, sir, and I go back to work. And I know he's got a flight, so I was really respectful of his time. So that day I go back, and I'm a project manager in the Marine Corps. I'm a logistics officer. I have $75 million of construction projects across 5 buildings taking place. So I go back kind of with haste, and I tell the people that I work with, our subcontractors, what's taking place. And I tell them the whys. I think sharing the whys are often very important. And they say, Joe, we'll do whatever we can to support you. It's the second time I heard it this day. And they were really wonderful. I also had a new mess hall which is kind of like a military restaurant that was being built, and so that was also being taken care of too. And they said they could take care of that piece of the business. So at 1 o'clock that day, I get a phone call from the command deck saying the commander wants to meet you. 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the commander's still here. Planes must have been delayed, or he's got all these combat maneuvers, and this doesn't just happen. These are aircraft that have to fly and cruise and people that have to take place. Well, they weren't going to take place that day because he was so focused on me. He said really what was super impactful to him is that he can make a difference. So when he said and sat me down, he said, hey, I told you this morning I was going to take care of you. I want you to contact this person. And he slides across his desk a piece of paper to me, and in my hand is a name, and it says Dr. Susan Koweski. And I would tell you, Dr. Susan Koweski, unbeknown to me, is a world-renowned craniofacial reconstruction surgeon. She's a plastic surgeon. She's part saint. She's a sculptress. She's an artist, and she's also a Rhodes Scholar. She is a brilliant woman. Well, now we have a wonderful doctor from what I hear, and she says she can meet with us the next day. So on Wednesday, we meet with her, and she also confirms the diagnosis. And now she's an expert, and she says, Joe, time is of the essence. We need to do this somewhat quickly. And she told me two things. She told me the first thing is that your son's condition is critical. Not only do we have to go into his skull because it's fused, we have to open that up, and we have to remove the top portion of his skull from the brain, which the outer coating of the brain is called the meninges. Anybody familiar with the meninges of the brain, the outer coating? And she used an analogy I'll never forget. If we all think our jobs are tough, think about this. She says, Joe, imagine putting a piece of Scotch tape onto a piece of tissue paper, the kind you wrap Christmas presents with. We're all familiar with that right now, Christmas presents. And taking that piece of tape off that tissue paper without any white on it. I've done it 50 different times. I've ripped the paper every single time. And she says, I have to be very fastidious, and this will take a lot of time. It will take 11 surgeons in 11 hours. He'll be in critical care for a week. He'll be in intensive care for another week because we can't have an infection in the brain. If we have an infection in the brain, think about having to reopen the entire skull. So hearing this news was like, wow, it's overwhelming. Who's been in an overwhelming position where you've had bad news, someone had cancer, or maybe someone has another diagnosis that just completely blew you away? I felt defeated. But I would tell you, one of the great things here is she said the second thing. She said, Joe, there's hope, but you also have to think about your child right now and really focus. And the second thing is he's going to need a lot of blood. If we go into the brain and we separate the skull from the meninges, and by the way, the skull has to be put into 50 different pieces. The brain has to be pulled out. And now they have to fit that new brain when it's all complete, or the new skull when it's all completed, back on to a lower portion of the head that's also been reconstructed. So this is a full head surgery. And so, long story short, she kind of tells us that this is important that you have blood. And so I said, I understand. She gave us some people to coordinate with blood, and she said, also start harvesting your own so that they can have some from the family. And it's like, I'll absolutely do that. So we take that news on Wednesday, and I drive to work on Thursday morning like I typically do. I go in the base at Camp Pendleton, California, beautiful San Diego morning. And I make a left-hand turn going on to the Marine Corps Air Station. Who has seen those big kiosk signs that have lights blinking on them, and they typically say welcome, or they say some news? Well, typically that sign always says, welcome to Marine Corps Air Station with a logo. And it said typically like the PT or the performance test is tomorrow, or it had certain specific sayings on there. Well, this day it said, blood drive for Joe Schmitt. It had a blinking heart, and it said, support one of your own. Pretty impactful, right? So I go through the gate, I do a salute, and I drive through, and I go around as I make a turn into my parking spot, and I see at my right-hand side, I see a large building. I talked to you earlier about the large airfield, right, with all these large buildings with helicopters in them. Typically 3,000 people work there. On the right-hand side, I see a blood mobile. I'm thinking, wow, that's so cool. We just talked with the doctor yesterday about having blood. Well, unbeknownst to me, my colonel knows all of this and has reached out to these doctors not only to provide them to me, but to also have to do some of this so I could focus on my family. So as I made the left-hand turn and I look down the row of all these buildings, I see 4 more blood mobiles. Wow, you know, he really went above and beyond. Just amazing leader. So I go in really quickly and I try to meet with the commander to say, hey, this is just an amazing moment for me. Thank you. Well, he's not in. Like, oh, geez, okay, I'll go down and do some more work. I'll turn over the rest of the business that I have up on the construction sites, and I'll get that taken care of. But I really want to meet with the commander to say thank you for putting my son on the kiosk, but also for really leveraging his network with all the other subordinate commanders, all the other colonels out there who are going to have people out there. Well, at 9 o'clock, I made sure it was early. I leave the office, go back out to my car, But as I'm going to my car, I just want to peek around the corner, and what I saw would bring any one of you to tears. Hundreds, if not 1,000 Marines were out there in uniform who were giving blood to my son. Well, that's impactful. I would tell you, he had a much bigger vision. His vision was this: Joe, I couldn't get the resources, all the resources I have here today for your son, but we can not only support your son with all the blood we need, but we'll also donate these 1,700 units of blood. I mean, some of these guys look like pincushions, you know? They were donating so much blood to the local community, which resulted in saving 4 lives that were in accidents that weekend in San Diego County. So let's talk about his leadership model. Who's going to do that for one individual person? We talk about servant leadership. We talk about putting other people's first and aligning personal passions with individual goals. And that's exactly what he did for me. He not only saved my son's life, he committed me to teaching servant leadership across the country and being guest speakers. And I can tell you, too, it's one of the things that have just impacted my life and everything I do, that if I can inspire and engage someone to lead, I absolutely try to do so. This springboarded into something much bigger. Those construction projects I told you about, months later, were finished. And a general came to my colonel and said, we're entering Operation Iraqi Freedom and combat operations in Iraq. We have people coming home who are injured, seriously injured, multiple amputees, bilateral amputees, people who have been hit by mines, who have been shot. We want someone to take care of them, but we don't have the facilities at the Naval Hospital, Camp Pendleton, to support that for initial resuscitative care. But we have our new buildings. He's like, I have brand new buildings. I'll work with Joe Schmitt, who's my area commander, kind of like the mayor of the city up there, and we'll work out a plan. So after what he did for me, it was the least I could do was come up with a great plan to help create the first Wounded Warrior Reception Center in the Marine Corps. I would tell you today, that is a multi-million-dollar enterprise that leads and helps and guides combat wounded Marines and sailors coming home from combat all across the country. But it started with making a difference with one single person. The general never forgot the commander's commitment to me. I never forgot the impact that he made on my life. And we started a reception center today, which is called the Wounded Warrior Program. It's absolutely amazing. So I'd leave with you this today, that if you can make an impact, even on one person's life, you may not make an impact across the world, you may not make world history, but you can and should make a difference in the lives of those people you work and you live and you celebrate with every single day. You do not have to have positional power, because the colonel, all due respect, sir, had no business to be in my business. But he took it upon himself as a leader, as a servant leader, to put me first. I'll also tell you the logistics to put all those blood mobiles out there and to take all the Marines off the flight line who had these combat missions prepared to go down for training had to be stopped and rotated. So there's significant behind-the-scenes work that has had to happen. Now remember, I was notified on Monday. This is the following Thursday. It took 4 days to change someone's life, and hundreds of thousands of people today benefit from that one decision. I challenge you to make that decision towards servant leadership. Thank you very much.